Good morning, everyone. Nolan Bowerly here, Bitcoiner. Welcome to episode 5 of The Breakup, where we take a frame about breaking up with the 1500s. So in this show, we're going to go through why this is changing, how it's changing. We're going to give examples. We're going to laugh at the old world, the modern world. We're going to have a good laugh at it, because the frame is breaking up. And when it comes to economy, when it comes to money, I always make the argument that even though we're dealing with numbers, it's not really math. This is not truly, although intellectually the frames fit a fight between Austrian school and Keynesian school. What I'm saying is, I don't care about the accounting, and I don't care necessarily about deficit spending in particular, and all that stuff. So it's not a modern monetary theory versus Austrian school argument, although that frame is fine and people can use it. What I'm using here is a little past that. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about which system is going to gather more people because it's more persuasive and psychologically more intact. So the reason I say that it's not an accounting fight is because it's really just a psychology engine. And whichever psychology engine perpetuates further is going to have the winning money. So the argument that I like to underline is the one that I hold myself. My prediction that Bitcoin ultimately will be the psychology engine driving forward for the entire economy. So let's get into today. And we have a great example, our favorite president in the history. Maybe he's our favorite president in history. We loved Trump. Trump was a good time, great president, amazing for Bitcoin, just great. But this guy, Biden, is, there's never been a better one. Let's all just admit it. I would vote for him twice if I could. He can have a third mandate, fourth, fifth. Let's just pump them up. Let's go. Joe Biden 2024 all the way. Unless Kanye runs. Kanye's got my vote. So our president, Joe Biden, said, we all got to get the vax now, right? I had the J&J, the thing, because I had to take some flights. So I got that one. I won't get any more, but I'm done with it. I won't get any more. I at this point, I can't tell the risk anymore. I can't measure the risk between not getting a vax, the vax, everything. So one was enough. But that's neither here nor there. He said everyone's got to get it. They lose their jobs and all this stuff. So dramatic stuff, right? Really dramatic stuff. It's lighting Twitter on fire. But of course, there's been an opposition to it. So it's not just that the president can come and declare that everyone has to get a vaccine. The great part about it is South Carolina, Texas, Florida, different cities, different businesses, particularly a lot of businesses that would fall under this are saying they're never going to do it, not going to do it. So you've got a rebellion, you've got a revolt against the greatest president. And what I see happening, the prediction that I have with all of these things, with all of this resistance, is that it's going to fit within this whole momentum to really change the way the world works and to usher in an era of Bitcoinization. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read a quote from Mises, the great economist who lived in the 1800s and is sort of at the foundation of a lot of Bitcoin thought. You could call him the first Bitcoiner, maybe, and get away with it. So he predicted even in the 1800s that this was going to happen. And he, of course, was a student of the psychological, a lot of economics is actually psychology, right? A lot of economics is actually psychology. And Mises had a really great quote, and I'm going to share it. Common man does not speculate about the great problems. With regard to them, he relies upon other people's authority. He behaves as every decent fellow must behave. He is like a sheep in the herd. It is precisely this intellectual inertia that characterizes a man as a common man. Yet the common man does choose, right? Choice is the foundation of economics, right? Yet the common man does choose. He chooses to adopt traditional patterns or patterns adopted by other people because he is convinced that this procedure is best fitted to achieve his own welfare. And he is ready to change his ideology and consequently his mode of action whenever he becomes convinced that this would better serve his own interests. So let's read the last line again. And he is ready to change his ideology and consequently his mode of action whenever he becomes convinced that this would better serve his own interests. So what's he basically saying? We're selfish, right? Everybody's selfish. No matter what, inevitably, we're all individually selfish, right? I think that's true, right? I tend to subscribe to the same logic. And the logic basically is, go ahead and get rich, especially if you're going to help people, right? I don't mind that Steve Jobs became as wealthy as he did. And if you remember at the end of Steve Jobs' life, oh, he didn't give as much to charity. Oh, Steve Jobs, you didn't give any to charity. Well, what Steve Jobs invented, what he had the audacity to invent by putting a microchip in every single person's pocket with the iPhone and the iPad and personal computers from the start, the word processor version of the personal computers. He wasn't building cryptographic, cryptologic, breaking codes computers. He wasn't in the NSA game. He just wanted people to put party invites out, right? Effectively solving in one generation global illiteracy. I mean, really, right? Really. Global illiteracy and complete free-for-all. Why? Well, computers are really accessible and there's a reason to read and you need it. And so not everyone's there. We got a little work to go, right? We got a little work to go. No one doubts that. But Steve Jobs' idea solved global illiteracy. So what do I give a shit about whether he gave some money to charity? What's more important? A couple $1 billion, like what Tesla said with the 6 billion that he could solve world hunger, which is a big scam, right? You can't solve it with that. No amount of money Steve Jobs had was ever going to make that problem go away. It was just to make other people feel better about who he was and how successful he was and not be so envious because he had to give it away in the end. But really, we should be congratulated. No one should say, what did he do for people at the end of his life? They should have said, shit, man, this guy solved global illiteracy, right? And I think most people did. I'm not saying that wasn't felt out there, right? That was a pretty standard opinion. So I'm not trying to say this is some, different take on Steve Jobs. What I'm trying to say is there shouldn't have been such a high portion of people who gave him shit for not giving his money away. So what this Mises quote ends up telling us is that actually, as entrenched as the modern nation states seem, right, as entrenched as they seem, it could all end overnight. And I'm going to make the case on the blackboard here about why it could end overnight, right? Why the sovereign individual thesis has so much momentum and why it could really become a defining force in the world, right? And I think this kind of takes care of it. Once again, inspired from that great chart that's been going around from that fella from MIT about, the stores of wealth, and then they all funnel down. If you go check my episode 2, I put that on the blackboard. I recreated it on the blackboard, and there's lots of folks who have been sharing that online, so you'll be able to find that pretty easily. So what we have here are 3 sections, right? Feudalism, this is everything before the 1500s and basically the fall of Rome, right? So things went into feudalism. Lords are at the top here because they really do represent the top of the heap. There was a king, but the king's power was limited by the collection of lords. I mean, that's what Magna Carta is, right? It's lords on horseback going up to tell the king, check yourself, buddy, because we're going to cut your damn head off if you don't do this. Because the lords had their own armies. If you read the book, The Sovereign Individual, what you find out is the knights themselves didn't have uniforms of a standing army. They each had individual uniforms, and each of these uniforms had their different chivalric oaths to their lords, right? So every lord had an army. You can think of it as a sports team at this point, right? So there's lots of NFLers out there, but you identify an NFLer from the uniform he wears and the team he plays for and the owner of the team and the city they play for, right? So knights were very much like sports, professional sports today in that sense, right? Much different role in society, but nevertheless, it was how you could identify them: the colors, the tassels, the garters. Even to this day, the knights around the queen, the special ones have a blue garter on their leg, right? That's like a special order of chivalric oath that you take for the queen and king in particular. And so the lords were really the top, right? And now the lords, not just because they had the armies, the reason why they were at the top is because of this middle part, right? The food The chicken, the wheat, the bread, the vegetables came from these castles and the actual lands, right? To this day, I'm from Quebec, and the old farming regions that they created in the 15 and 1600s when they first came are still called lordships, right? Because these people who came were given it, the transliteration, right? A lordship. So that's still around, and then of course the knights, right? The knights guarded all that. Now, for this whole system to work, the people supported it, right? The people were at the bottom as the foundation for this, because the people were the ones tending the farms. The soldiers were there to protect them. Now, this thing started off really great, right? These people were really free. They could arbitrate between lords and have a lot of salary mobility. They were able to move between farms, and the lords had a tenuous hold on them. And if you actually look into some of the history of the Middle Ages, you'll find out it was one of the great periods of individual freedom where individual farmers had probably more wealth and success than they'd had in Europe for generations before and generations after. But nevertheless, the people help support this system. Now, what happens when the guns are made, right? When you invent guns, it kind of makes these guys pretty useless, right? So all of a sudden, whoever has the most guns can easily win. It's not the most people anymore. And what happens is, instead of the lords, right, the kings later became a president, right? So it could be a commoner and not hereditary, which more fit in line with this, because of the following: corporates, right? Companies, um, banks, legal system, all of that conspired together. Conspired is the wrong word. Coordinated together to make the food we needed to eat, right? So the king to president is because like this, you didn't have to be a hereditary knight or a hereditary lord. Anyone could start a company, right? It was a really great system. This was much better at the time for a lot of people. Some of these people got the short end of the stick but they had already fallen into it in feudalism. Feudalism had degraded at the end, right? It was terrible. You couldn't leave. You were slave. These guys became so well armed, right, that they entrenched all of these castles and lordships. You couldn't really leave. The beginning you could leave, by the end you couldn't, because these guys became too good. Now, what happens here is the kings know that these merchants are getting strong when this transitions, right? And they combine with them. And they fund these armies because they have the money, right? They get the guns. And what happens is this one army, instead of many armies under the Lord, you now have one army in a uniform with guns under this one system, right? And then the people agree that this is the better system. They all switched overnight, right? Literally overnight. Like, the 1500s, we fail to realize how quick the change was when Martin Luther hung that epitaph, and then everything started to cascade differently, right? This is the printing press time, right? That's part of how this conversion takes place. And so it happened really quick, much quicker than people realize, right? Much quicker than people realize. And the thesis is we're seeing that play out today. What Mises said, of course, is that people will choose things that serve their own interests much more, right? That are more selfish, and for that reason they can change en masse at once, right? En masse at once. Now look at what happened the past couple days, and here's part of the thesis, right? That we went from feudalism and lords to nations and kings and the president, right? Large federal nations sort of characterize this: Canada, United States, Australia. And then the sovereign individual now, where lords, kings, and president turn into mayors and governors, right? Now, the reason we can see that trend already is because of the people standing up to the vaccine mandate, right? The states that are fighting for that, right? Now, when you look at people choosing, right, especially at this corporate level, let's move down, right? So we can see, look what the mayors of New York City and Miami did yesterday by declaring that they're going to take their salaries now for the next year and a bit in Bitcoin, right? So they're saying to the folks, we're going to take Bitcoin, so we're leaving that federal dollar sort of in the dust. We're cities, we're competing for individual talent to come to our city, right? And so that they've already declared these things, right? Now we've got Biden saying we're going to have the vax mandate. These places, not New York, but Florida, you can go and try and get refuge there, depending on how they'll some places react. But it looks like they're going to be given a lot more leeway over there. Now, when you look at most, and let's even take the corporate one. Here's a video that's going viral today, and to bring it back to the Mises quote, right? Everyone's talking about this. Microsoft had like their corporate event yesterday, and a bunch of the staff, a bunch of the hosts of this show, right, Microsoft employees, they'd say their title, and then they would come out and say, their pronouns, he, hims, and all this stuff, and their hair color, their eye color, like literally every physical signal that you could use to bucket them, because apparently, that's part of this whole crazy thing, is that somehow these nation states are adopting all of these frames around sociology, especially around identifying with groups, right? That who you identify with is basically who you are inside, and so it's been viewed, I don't know, 5 or 6 million times already, and everyone's just laughing at them. I mean, at this point, I can't think of anything more cringe than working for Microsoft, honestly. Like if Microsoft offered me $1 million a year to work for them, I wouldn't do it. Like it would be too embarrassing. I would say, well, what am I going to do after? Like it would be like, it's almost like an actor making like a B softcore porno. You know what I mean? Like it's embarrassing. Like it's not that you don't want to do it. It's cringe. It's really cringe, right? So I think I would just turn down $1 million a year easily. Like, well, why would I bother with that crap, right? If they pay me in Bitcoin, we'll talk, right? But anyway, they're not offering it. I'm just saying I would be embarrassed to work for them, right? In almost any context. And that's just me. I mean, maybe I'm more extreme, but I think a lot of people are watching that video saying this is the most cringe corporate thing I've ever seen, right? This is really embarrassing. And indeed it was, right? And indeed it was. So right away, you go back to that Mises quote, right, about self-interest and the amount of Americans quitting this piece right now, right, just to be this lonely old guy here smiling and laughing, right? Now, even myself, I'm arbitraging regions. I'm not a permanent resident of any country any longer. I bob around and spend time, here and there. But I'm about to buy a farm, and I've, anecdotally, speaking with a lot of OG Bitcoiners that have been around for a long time, it's not just me buying a farm, right? I think it's in the air. We're basically, it's hard for me to find someone who doesn't have a piece of land right now that's in Bitcoin that's been around for a long time. Everyone's sort of grabbing it, right? And when you start comparing these systems, you'll find out why it is so, right? Like if you start comparing these things and you say, it goes from feudalism to nations to sovereign, lords, kings, president, mayors. Now the food production, there's the Mises thing again. Where's the food coming from? Look at the inflation that this system is creating. Look what it's doing to these people at the bottom, right? Look at what it's doing. It's tough, right? I don't know how people are buying some of this stuff. I had that chicken that you just saw in the that I put in the thumbnail for this. That one was inexpensive because it's been in my fridge for months now. But you could easily spend $30, $40 on a chicken these days, right? So self-interest again, right? Self-interest again. When you look at this system, right, here's the main difference between the sovereign individual system. In feudalism, lords making the food, knights protect it. In the end, the people were the foundation of this whole thing, right? In nations, the kings, president, we have the corporate system, the legal system, and the soldiers, and then once again, the people benefited. No one's saying this is oppression necessarily, right? Built off of them at a certain point benefit, cost benefit, right? There's cost to the system, but the cyclical nature and the entropic nature, right? The entropy that sets into any system has meant that this is degraded, and the people, probably getting less out of it now than they ever have. Which means, right, ripe for change. And that's what this, again, what that chart that was going around the other day really gets at is that you're replacing the foundation, you're replacing the base of the system with Bitcoin instead of people. Because in my graph, the people, right, have become what the knights, what the castles, what the corporate entities, what the legal system, what the soldiers, what all this stuff was meant to produce for the people, right? The people themselves have migrated into the actual structure, into the actual system, into the actual beating heart, the beating heart of the system that's about to be chosen. I'm not saying entropy won't set into this one day, just as it has here. It's a cycle, right? Entropy is a natural force. It sets into everything. Probably will set into Bitcoin one day. You can go read my science fiction book about how AI, quantum processing, introduces an entropy into Bitcoin. But it's science fiction, and we're not there. But I wanted to imagine what could do it, and I think I have. Not for 100 years, right? So that's it. That's what we got. We've got a system where we're flowing from feudalism to sovereign individualism. People will no longer be at the bottom and the foundation. They will migrate, take the role of the castles, the knights, the soldiers, the corporate entities, the bankers, right? They'll play all those roles, but on an individual basis. You'll still get the food. It'll still be produced. But the foundation of it all is the money, not the people. That's the difference. Thank you, everyone. I'm traveling to Lisbon tomorrow, but I've got to drive somewhere to catch that flight first. But I will get on for a short broadcast. But until then, see you.